I know most of you here in this room have aspirations, big ambitions, or a goal you wish to achieve during this lifetime. Unfortunately, I've come here to tell you that you should never, under any circumstance, pursue those goals and aspirations without having years of experience, without your skills being polished and perfect. Take a simple look at the successful individuals you all look up to, the economists, the writers, the scientists, the artists. All of them are in possession of something you're clearly not, and that is perfection. You're a mere fool if you take the first step of your journey knowing you might twist your foot and lack some balance, instead of having a step that is just flawlessly crafted to perfection. Wait, that is such a radical and out-of-touch claim, right? Well, what if I tell you that these are not my words, but rather the words of a bully? A bully which lived and echoed inside of my head once I embarked on a journey to write my first book. My name is Isabella. I'm an 18-year-old writer and aspiring journalist, and today I'll present to you perfectionism in a way in which you've never perceived it before, but in a way in which you will realize it is one of the many silent factors in our journey which is actively hindering us from achieving all of our ambitions. So my story begins when I was 14 years old, when writing poetry was one of my biggest passions. Poetry was what I loved doing the most. But let's be honest, poetry does not require much commitment. I mean, after all, it's just a short piece of literature that does not require more than a day to obtain its final result. So despite my love for it, I knew deep within my bones that I wanted to take it a step further and challenge myself. One day, I decided that my next big step would be embarking on a journey as a novelist and writing a book. I remember I had this brilliant idea of how the story would start and how it would end. And I remember spending endless hours planning the story, the characters, the plot, the storyline, and every single little detail. In my head, there was just simply no more time to lose. As a result, I just grabbed my computer, took a couple books from my favorite authors that would serve as inspiration, and opened my Google document, eager to finally begin writing. As smoothly as this all might have sounded to you, having sat down to write, I was foolishly and completely unaware of this Machiavellian individual that I would encounter during my journey and that would prevent me from finally launching my career as a writer. Ironically, and in my head, for some reason, I thought that this individual wanted me to be the best at what I did, the most perfect writer of them all. But after pondering on it for a little, I actually came to the realization that I did not want the best for me, because it made me relentlessly stare at my blank document, and I would just simply write a word. Then I would scrutinize it. Then I would delete it. Then I would write a sentence, and then I would overthink whether it was good enough or not. And it looked something like this, and this, and even this. Messy and exhausting, I know. But believe it or not, I spent a whole day trying to figure out the perfect first sentence for my book. And then it turned into a month, and then 6 months, and then a whole year had passed, and it all had been as if I had never decided to start writing. So out of all of this, I started getting questions in my head like, is this really what you enjoy writing? Or are you really that talented at it, and do you really love writing as much as you think you do? So you see, I had let this individual not only define who I was and what I enjoyed, but I had let it be the biggest obstacle during my journey, stripping me away of all contentment. And as insufferable as this sounds, this was like dealing with a condescending and mean individual dressed in the clothes of a supportive friend. If you really want to know its name, it lingers around, knocking on doors and haunting people, and it goes by the name of maladaptive perfectionism. Maladaptive perfectionism is a type of perfectionism that I love referring to as cursed, because instead of remaining motivated by your high standards to strive and learning from your failures while challenging yourself, you will simply set unrealistic standards, become obsessed over them, and you never begin working towards your goal. And it starts attacking you when you have an ambition, a goal you're willing to work towards. For me, I was willing to work towards that book and get it done. But I was also an avid reader, so I constantly sought inspiration from my favorite writers, despite them having started from scratch. But let's be honest, If you're an aspiring CEO, you'll most certainly compare who you are and what you have to an already established multi-billionaire economist. If you're an aspiring painter, you'll most certainly compare the first draft of your painting to those of your favorite artists hanging at the Louvre. And I could go on and on. This seeking of inspiration, as much as it is not met with malice, it definitely makes you set unrealistic standards, which lead to point 3, which is endless procrastination and avoidance of the task. Like me, you either sit there and constantly fantasize about the final result of your goal, or you start working towards what you want, however, at the cost of constantly scrutinizing every single little thing you do. However, even after I knew all of this, and even after I was aware as to why maladaptive perfectionism was plaguing me so much in my journey, frankly, I was still desperate for solutions to keep it away. No matter what I did, everything circled back to me being obsessed over the finalized result of my novel. And I mean, how could I even call myself a writer? I had nothing more than a foolish couple of poems written down. Eventually, in the midst of seeking all of these desperate answers, I did something that quite literally and without intention changed the trajectory of my journey. I remember it was one ordinary weekday, and I was just sitting down in my room, and I began writing. I know it sounds quite cliche. I mean, I'm a writer, I'm supposed to be writing, right? Well, let me tell you that this time it felt quite different. I just felt my fingers tackling down the tabs of my computer and my words flowing like a river. What emerged from this was not only a stunning essay that brought tears to my mother's eyes, made me regain faith in my own talent, but most importantly, it gave me the opportunity to attend one of the largest journalism programs in the world, the School of the New York Times, where I was able to work with several New York Times reporters, Ivy League professors, and I even had the chance to report on the jazz scene in New York and Black heritage. Anyway, after having been handed this opportunity, I realized that when I wrote without a goal, I achieved something way more authentic and way better than I would have ever achieved if I had a fixed goal in mind. And I enjoyed writing this time. I mean, I really did. I wasn't concerned whether my essay would be revolutionary, whether it would change lives, or whether I would receive praise for it or not. I just loved doing it. But did maladaptive perfectionism just vanish that easily? How did I do it? And how can you do it so you can start actively pursuing your ambitions? Well, I'm going to tell you that the first step to cutting off maladaptive perfectionism is to book a ticket to a train without a destination. I mean, sounds quite odd, right? We've always been told that we should know where we're going. But frankly, that defeats the whole point. If we know where we're going, we're never going to appreciate the idyllic landscapes that are presented to us outside, or the great people we might meet along the way. Maybe the not-so-great people too, but regardless, they all add some value to our journey. If we know where we're going, all we're going to do is fixate over where we're going, and we're going to just fantasize how we're going to thrive and go places when we arrive there. However, the key here is to know what you're doing, but not where you're going. That way, you might end up in a destination you would have never imagined you would have ended up at, like New York City. Then, there's point number 2. If you really want to cut off maladaptive perfectionism, you really need to stop idealizing all of those celebrities you look up to. The truth is, we as humans consume media and art in their final form. Let's talk about it. Books, films, songs, the invention of any technological products, musical albums. Are we daily exposed into the way in which all of these things are made? Frankly, no, we are not. But what we constantly do is compare what we barely have to already accomplished individuals. We place celebrities on a pedestal and we deem them capable of something we apparently are not. You're an aspiring singer. You just won't stop comparing your first song to Beyonce's or Taylor Swift's latest release. You're an aspiring footballer. You just won't stop comparing your skills to those of Messi and Ronaldo, despite their years of not hesitating to try and try again. And I, as an aspiring writer, could not stop comparing barely written paragraphs and poetry stanzas to Jane Austen and Dostoevsky's final drafts of their classical novels that had reached every corner of the world. I mean, even with TED Talks, I bet you're sitting there thinking to yourself, wow, I could never do what she's doing. standing there and speaking in front of a crowd. How scary. The reality is, I had a couple horrible drafts before this one, and at least one crisis over how this TED Talk would be laid out, and if it would be as good as I imagined it would be. And let me remind you that all the individuals that inspire you and that you look up to were at one point self-conscious, and they were not as good as they are now. Let's take a look at Leonardo da Vinci's first painting. I mean, it's quite ordinary. Look at it. You can't even compare it to the Mona Lisa. But arguably, without the first painting, the Mona Lisa could have never come to fruition. Or think of Adele's first song that she wrote at 19. It can be compared to other hits she wrote years later, which you all know, love, and sing. So the point is, if you don't start now, you evidently can get to where you want to get later. No matter how horrible your first draft looks, just remember that the first draft of your favorite artist looked as horrid as yours maybe does. Then there's point 3. And this is one that I began pondering while having been a victim to maladaptive perfectionism. And this is a completely different factor. No, literally, a life-ending one. I began thinking about death. Throughout our lives, we always get told, live your life as if we're the last day. But we have heard this quote so many times that we have failed to truly grasp its meaning. What if you die tomorrow? You spent your whole life trying to figure out the most compelling title for your business, the perfect brushstroke for your painting, and the most beautiful first sentence for your book. And let me remind you, there are a plethora of individuals out there who are less talented than you are, and yet way more successful. Perfectionism, they really laughed at that, and they simply didn't care. They know that our time on this earth is limited, and that we are ephemeral, and that perfectionism can only be attained through quote-unquote imperfectionism, through joy. But suddenly, after cutting off maladaptive perfectionism, I turned into one of those individuals too. I now find joy in my writing, not in having something written. Know the difference. One is being at a train without a destination, and the other is being at a destination. Frankly, I don't put too much thought into my book being polished for publishers and editors to adore. I simply find joy in coming home and writing 200 to 300 words per day, crafting characters, or writing a small poem, a 600-word article that criticizes the geopolitical issue, or crafting characters like a stubborn queen of strong will that has been exiled from her kingdom because of a treacherous king who did not know how to love. The point is, it is all about the small steps in your journey, not the large-scale ones. Now, I know it's been a long way ever since I stepped foot in this stage. And you might be asking yourself, where does this story end? Well, looking back at my early beginnings, I began with unexceptional poems and foolish short stories that, frankly, I don't even read these days. But I stand here, and I acknowledge that without those short stories and those poems, I would have never ended up at the school of the New York Times and writing new things every day, exploring things about myself as a writer, every step I take. After all of this, I can with certainty tell you that whatever ambitions and goals you pursue don't have to be perfect. They just have to be. Thank you.